Professor Wergeles here. I'm hoping that you tried this by yourself and you got it to work so you can see how jQuery works and you just get familiar writing your own code. I know we're writing a lot of code together, so you're just kind of looking at what mine is and then copying it down. It's good to practice on your own so you can figure out how to write jQuery, what's the syntax, what are the errors, if I forget a semicolon, you have to have the document ready. All these things I can tell you, but you also need to implement on your own so you can get a feel for it. Because on the exam, I'm going to ask you how to write jQuery code. And if you haven't written jQuery code by yourself very much, it's not going to be very easy for you. If you go and write the code by yourself and you go through some of the struggles of writing the code by yourself, when you get to the exam, it's going to be easy for you and you're going to do well on the exam. The more experience you have, the better you're going to do. Taking notes from class is great, but you also need to go and try it on your own. So let's see how we can do this. I'm first going to start with the get username function. Below I have an onClick, and it's going to be for this button, and it's going to call the get username function. Now I don't want this to happen. I want to use jQuery. So let's see the equivalent. I'm going to write it right up at the top. First, we have to wait till the document is finished loading in order to add the onClick. So I'll call the ready function, which will trigger this anonymous function. Now, what I like to do is write this all on one line first. I'll write this on line 1 to make sure I have the close bracket for the function, 2 to make sure I have the close parenthesis for the ready function, and 3 so I remember the semicolon. When I enter this on a new line, this kind of looks funny because we haven't seen this before. It almost looks like somebody's frowning and winking at the same time, and they have a small mustache. But that's not the case. This is a closed bracket for the function, this is a closed parenthesis for the ready function, and this is a semicolon because this is an executable statement. So once the DOM's finished loading, I can add a click function for these buttons. Now, each click is going to be different. It's going to call a different set of code. So I can either say for all buttons add a click, or I can say for each button add its own separate click, which is what I'll recommend. So I'll put an ID here to make it easier. And let's just call this button 1. Or we can even be more specific. We can call it the get username button. Okay, that's kind of long, so we can shorten it a little bit. We'll just call it get username. And we can do an ID here. We can say set username. And here we can do an ID for check password. Now that I have these IDs, I'll no longer need the onClick. So if I put all this on one line, I'm going to remove these onClicks because I'm not going to need them. I'm going to set the onClick with jQuery so we can see the full equivalence of jQuery and JavaScript. So I'm going to remove those onClicks. I set the IDs. Now let's come back up to the top, and now I can grab that ID. I'm going to use jQuery to select that ID called get username. And once I select that ID, I'm going to add the click function. The click function is going to call this anonymous function once the click is activated. I usually like to set this all on one line, so I remember my close bracket, close parentheses, and semicolon. Once I have that set up, I'll do a new line and write the code that needs to be executed. So you see the get username function is going to do this print. So I can copy this print and put it right here in the click. I removed the onClicks, so now if I come back to the browser and refresh, you should see this still working because I'm clicking this button and jQuery is now setting the click function. And I could do this the same for all 3. I can say, okay, I'm going to call the set username ID. I'm going to add a click event on it using jQuery. Once it's clicked, this anonymous function is going to be called. I usually like to write that on one line, so I remember my close bracket, close parentheses, and semicolon. Once I have it all set up properly, I'll do a new line and type the code that needs to be executed. So here I'm going to set the value to Sally. So I'll copy the set username code from the JavaScript function and put it here in my onClick. And I have one more left. Okay, but let's make sure this works. So save your code, refresh the page, click on set, and then do a get. And you'll see that that is working properly. Last one would be check password. So let's implement the equivalent in jQuery. I'm going to grab the check password ID. I'm going to add a click event. And once the button's clicked, this anonymous function is going to be called. I usually like to set that up on one line so I can remember my close bracket, close parentheses, and semicolon. Once it's set up properly, I'll click a new line here and write the code that needs to be executed. So I'll come down here to the check password. I'll grab my if statement and paste it into this click function. So you see it's a little bit different. With JavaScript, I have different function declarations. So I have 3 different functions. When I do an onClick, those functions are called. With jQuery, I'm setting an onClick with the jQuery selector. Once this click is triggered, then this code will be executed. And it's still in a function, but it's an anonymous function because it's executing in the click here. Now I can put the getUsername function here as a parameter. I can remove the anonymous function, put getUsername, save it. You'll notice I didn't have to put the parentheses because this is a jQuery function. And come back to the browser, refresh, type in Nick, click on the Get button, and you'll see that the code is still executing. So I can actually put a JavaScript function here, or I can put my anonymous function here. Usually in the industry, you're going to see this anonymous function. However, you can still put the JavaScript function there. So if I look at this code, it's going to look a little confusing at first. You're going to see a lot of $signs. You're going to see a lot of these weird close brackets that you may not be used to seeing. But essentially, it is much easier because it's going to take all of the JavaScript code and it's just in one location. Whereas before, I have to put these on clicks down here, or I have to put in on load. I'm kind of mixing my HTML and my JavaScript. Whereas here, I'm totally separating the two. I don't need to implement the onClick. I can do an onClick right here in the jQuery code. Now, I could do this with JavaScript too, but when I use JavaScript, you're going to see the onClick in the HTML. Even though I can add the onClick in the JavaScript, it's not as easy as doing it in the HTML. But with jQuery, it's much easier to use the click function and keep all the jQuery code separately. So this is the same as what you'd see as before, where I put an onClick here, and then it's going to call these functions. But here, it's all written in jQuery. Everything in jQuery needs to be in the ready function because I'm not going to be able to add a click function unless the getUsername ID is there. Once it's there, I can add the click. Once they click, this function will be called, and this code will be executed. We're going to continue into radios. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.